Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Live at Lunch. This is a free noon-hour lecture series that happens on the third Wednesday of the month, and it features guest speakers, both from the museum and community guests. My name is Kim Goff, and I am a learning program developer. I'm honored to live and work here on the territory of the Lekwungen, known today as the Songhees and Wasepsum First Nations. Lekwungen means place to smoke herring. And the Lekwungen people, as I mentioned, are known as the Songhees and the Wasepsum, and Wasepsum is, or Kusapsun, is the name used for Esquimalt. Our newest feature exhibition, Beyond the Beat, opened on May 30th, and it comes to us from the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg. To tell us more about the exhibition and the content, we have two guests today. Our Vice President of Research, and Dr. Jodi Giesbrecht, and Dr. Lorne Hammond. Jodi joined the Royal BC Museum as the Vice President of Archives, Collections, and Research in 2024. Previously, Jodi was a Director of Research and Head Curator at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, where she oversaw the research and curatorial development of the CMHR's core galleries and temporary exhibitions, as well as collections management and stewardship. Big title, yes, I saw people, yeah. Dr. Lorne Hammond got his doctorate in Ottawa before joining the Royal BC Museum in 1997, and he worked here until his recent retirement. During his time here, he added to and conducted research on the collections. He curated areas of the History Gallery. He developed temporary exhibitions. He reinterpreted Helmkin House and St. Anne's Schoolhouse. He taught students, and he wrote academic works. Also a lot of work. And somehow, he also found time to pursue his many passions, including music. Today, they will both come and share with us, but we'll begin with Dr. Jodi Giesbrecht.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks so much, everyone, for coming out today. We are really glad to see you here. I hope you've had a chance to explore the exhibition already, and if not, you'll enjoy it after this. So welcome here again. So I'm going to give a little bit of a context and overview of the exhibition in terms of its sort of historical development when it was first conceptualized at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which, as Kim mentioned, I worked there at the time, so it's really quite special for me to be here now and able to host the exhibition in this space. So I'll just again give a bit of a high-level overview of what we call the core exhibition. The version that you see here at RBCM is kind of bigger and better, I'll say, than the original. I feel like I can say that. We were able to add a lot of unique local content specific to British Columbia, and that is what Lauren will be speaking to a little bit further. So Beyond the Beat is an exhibition about music and social change. So looking at different artists and bands and musicians whose work really inspired social change, political engagement, and sort of reflect, aspirations towards social justice and human rights. I forgot there's a fancy clicker. The origin of the exhibition, or sort of the early inspiration, actually came from an exhibition that was developed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, in partnership with the Newseum that used to be in Washington, D.C. and sadly no longer exists. I went to see the show in 2017, actually, which is kind of wild considering that's 8 years ago. And so that exhibition really looked at the intersection of rock and roll and American politics. It was highly US-centric, as you can kind of probably gather by some of the imagery, the branding of that exhibition, and actually the entire organization of that show was by US president. So you had your Ronald Reagan era and your Barack Obama era. And it was, interesting, but in thinking about bringing that exhibition to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, our first thought was, well, that's not going to fly, that approach. And so our intention was to kind of rethink the organization of the show, significantly Canadianize the content. And so we had kind of done a fair bit of work to do that, and then COVID hit and disrupted the museum sector, as it did so many parts of our lives. And so that exhibition was actually completely canceled, which was a little bit disappointing. But to give you, and apologies for the less than ideal photos, but these were taken by my iPhone in 2017. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of what the original exhibition looked like. So on the far left, you can see the sort of interpretive organization based on US president. So there we've got a photo of Richard Nixon with Elvis Presley. Some of the kind of, I thought, kind of pretty cool artifacts that were in that show that unfortunately didn't survive all of the different iterations. The image of the guitar you see there belonged to Jimi Hendrix. That was the guitar he played at Woodstock when he played this really famous rendition of the Star Spangled Banner. And so when you viewed that guitar, that audio was also looping, and it was a pretty cool experience. Next to that is a jacket that was worn by Country Joe McDonald, and he also wore that when he performed at Woodstock. The top right is Lady Gaga's meat dress that she wore several years ago at, I think it was the Video Music Awards, which now is more kind of like a taxidermy, like beef jerky dress. It's probably one of the biggest challenges that a conservator would ever face is how do you preserve this dress made of actual meat and preserve it over time. So that was kind of cool, but also disgusting. And then at the bottom right, there was also the original costumes worn by the village people, which was super interesting to see. So that was kind of the original Louder Than Words exhibition. So Beyond the Beat kind of rose from the canceled ashes of the version that we had been working on. And so the show that you see today is really an entirely new creation, a brand new interpretive approach rather than organization based on US president. We organized the show based on human rights theme. So you'll see there's a section, and I'll get to the sections in just a minute. There's a section on racial justice, a section on Indigenous rights and reconciliation, women's rights and LGBTQ2+ rights, climate change and the environment. And so rather than following kind of a strictly historical or chronological approach, the intention is really to allow visitors to kind of wander the exhibition in a bit of a more free way without a prescriptive kind of path. Some of the key messages that we are hoping that visitors take away from the exhibition is, the different ways that artists have engaged in social and political issues. So you'll see some artists or some songs that are sort of your really iconic protest songs that really represent a social movement. But then you'll also see some artists who, maybe the lyrics of their music aren't overtly political, but in sort of who they are, the spaces that they claim, whether they were, the first woman to perform here or, challenging racial discrimination in the industry, the sort of variety of ways that artists have used their platform to engage in human rights. Another key theme that we hope to convey is sort of this interesting balance between the continuity of issues over time, but also the different ways that artists have engaged with them. So within the thematic zones, you'll notice there is some historical chronology. And so if we look at, let's say, the section on racial justice, for example, there's a large looping media piece that looks at protests for racial equality all the way from the March on Washington in 1963 through to the 90s and the rise of politically engaged rap and hip hop, and then all the way through to the Black Lives Matter movement in more recent years. And so the message there being, in a lot of ways, the issues and the key message has remained remarkably consistent over time. But the way in which artists have engaged, varies and evolves as genres evolve, as music evolves, that kind of thing. Another key theme is the way in which protest music has evolved from more of a sort of broader engagement with social issues to more identity-based. So thinking about like anti-war protests, even the way that racial justice was spoken about during the civil rights movement is quite different than movements today that are a lot more based on individual identity. And then tied to that, the impact of social media in social and political engagement, themes of sort of democratization of protest, the way in which more people are able to access platforms to use their voice. The power of music to reflect social norms and issues, but also to produce social movements. So that kind of age-old question of, does pop culture kind of produce culture or does it reflect culture? And my answer is always it's both. And then music as being both transformative and also healing. So a few different components to the exhibition. So when you walk in, there's a bit of a just sort of immersive sonic experience, introducing some of the high-level themes and experiences that you'll encounter in the exhibition. As I mentioned, there's different thematic zones. There's a variety of digital and interactive elements, and I'll get to those in just a second. And then there's a concert venue and film, and I'll get to that also. One of the sort of really neat features of the exhibition is the RFID engagement. And so this is, if you've been through the show, you'll sort of recognize when you walk in, there's an area where you can grab a little disc. So that disc is RFID enabled. And so what you can do as you go throughout the different zones in the exhibition is tap the disc on a different piece of the exhibitry, which kind of unlocks an additional experience or extra content. Typically audio, given it's a music exhibition, but it's just sort of a cool way to sort of engage in a bit more of an interactive way. So in addition to the RFID discs, there are different what are called digital insight stations, which is a fancy word for a touchscreen. And so you can dive a little bit deeper into some of the content, some of the text and objects that you see are interpreted a little bit further. There's additional audio and video clips. One of my favorite features is this boombox that you see at the top right of the slide, and that tells the story of Flow 93.5 FM radio, which was the first Black-owned radio station in Canada. So when you tap your disc on the different circles that you see there, you get different historical or archival radio clips that were played on the station. And we were able to have that experience narrated by Shad, which was pretty cool. He also speaks French, so we were able to get him to do both the English and French version. There's an interactive censorship exploration. That's what you see at the lower right-hand side. So the image is deliberately pixelated. Once you tap your disc on one of the little circles, there's a story about censorship that appears with regards to music in North America. And then the concert venue theater experience, which again, I'll get to. So just really quickly, overview of the different thematic areas. So Voice of the People looks at music from folk to punk rock, and looking at the way in which music and artists in these genres really focused on working class struggles and issues facing youth, issues of poverty, unemployment, and class divisions. This is one area where we added a lot of local content, particularly around punk music. So I know Lorne has a lot of really cool things to say about that, and I won't dwell on the content much here. We shall overcome. That's the section on racial justice that I mentioned. So looking at the different ways in which artists and communities have used music to raise awareness about racial injustice, police brutality, all kinds of issues faced by Black North Americans. So in addition to some really cool artifacts like Chuck D's baseball jacket from Public Enemy, there's that large looping media feature that I mentioned that traces music from the March on Washington all the way through Black Lives Matter. And there you can see an image of that looping media feature. The section called Resurgence is all about Indigenous rights and reconciliation and the resurgence of Indigenous music, particularly in the past few years. So it takes, there's historical content for sure, but it takes a bit more of a contemporary approach to Indigenous music today. So the top right image on the far right is an interactive experience where, again, you can use your disc and tap some of those squares and listen to a little segment of contemporary Indigenous artists. So really intending to show the breadth and diversity of Indigenous artists today. Some really cool objects in this section. Some of my favorites are the mask and jacket that were worn by the Snotty Nose Res Kids at the Juno Awards a few years ago. This section as well was developed in consultation with an Indigenous Advisory Committee. Rise Up, so this is the section on women and 2S LGBTQ plus artists. Again, taking a bit of a historical approach, tracing everything from the emergence of feminist artists in the 1970s to contemporary artists today. So there you see heart jackets, and beside that is a stage outfit that was worn by Rita McNeil. People often ask me what some of my favorite stories are, and that's definitely one of them. I grew up in the 90s, and Rita McNeil to me was just a very sort of gentle folk singer that kind of, spoke to Canadiana, but that was kind of all I knew. And it was only in doing the research for this exhibition that I learned that she was such a radical feminist in the 1970s. So much so that the RCMP spied on her and tried to infiltrate some of her women's group meetings. Music Goes Green, so different artists that have engaged with topics around climate change, which we think of as a really contemporary issue, but some of the stories in this section are from the 1970s and some of those early Earth Day protests, the emergence of Greenpeace. And then Can't Stop the Rock. So this is where that interactive experience around the censorship of music is located. And so this area looks at the way in which music censorship in North America was really mostly about kind of policing issues of race and gender and artists who, dared to transgress some of those boundaries. And then again, the concert venue experience. So this features an original short documentary film on different Canadian artists. The interviews included in the film are all original, so they were conducted by staff at the Human Rights Museum. It's presented in different chapters that look at different themes, and so the film's about 10 minutes long or so, but you can kind of come in and out of the theater as you want and still kind of get a lot of the meaning of this experience. And so throughout all of those zones, we've supplemented with, again, local BC content. And then also added kind of a standalone section as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hammond now to elaborate a little bit more on those pieces.
Good afternoon. This has been a fun project. How did it start? I was retired, and some friends in electronic music and I put on a kids' petting zoo for synthesizers at the Moss Street Paint-In. It's usually some white tents outside the art gallery at the top of the hill. And Michael, the head of exhibits, came over and said, "Do you have a couple of minutes? I've got an idea to run past you." And he said, "I think it's something that might interest you a lot." And that's how it kind of began, and it was a lot of fun as a project. I thought Orca's Head was my last exhibit, but along came this opportunity, and I had a lot of fun with it. And it's also, as a curator, the first time I delivered text, photos, copyright releases for photos and films and AV footage and everything like that, handed it in and walked away. Instead of working with curators, conservators, collection managers, the trades, and the exhibit designers, and the marketing people, and the learning people, and all the team here that make exhibits great. And so it was to open by invitation only on the Thursday night before the public opening. So I saw it for the first time at 11 o'clock Thursday morning. And it was sort of, wow. And for me as a curator, that was a first experience to not be part of that whole flow. Again, because museums really are a team sport. They really are. And I always like to say that when you're building an exhibit, at any moment in the room, the most important person and the power in the room moves around. And it might be the mount builder who's putting a mask up in a case, and everybody stops and waits, and then it's perfect. And then the power is the person who's doing the lighting. And it's not a hierarchy when you're building something, because you're doing it together, and you all want it to be the best it can be when it opens. So that was a lot of fun. And it was the first time I saw these objects I'd been negotiating for in the cases. And a lot of that has to do, well, with lots of people, but particularly the designer. Because Kelsey Miner, one of our two designers, and you usually never hear about them, because they're kept in the basement, working on computers and with big color printers. But they're making the decisions about how things will go together in the case, what the color scheme is going to be, and the question for Kelsey was how to make the new content match the content that was coming from Winnipeg, so it would all flow together. And she did a remarkable job. I was very, very impressed. And I'd never worked with her before. I'd often worked with Steve, and the two of them have desks, like writing partners in the same room, sort of thing. So I was really happy with it. And some of the decisions on where to put things were not where they were going to be put in my mind, but the decisions she made were better. So that was pretty cool. There was some discussion about the discs, and one thing we couldn't do is completely rewrite the database for the discs, because it's a complex system, and we were doing this in a short window of time. So you'll see a few things that have images of cell phones for QR codes that can take you to external material. And also there'll be a couple of computer touchscreens around where you don't use the discs, you just tap on it and make your decisions, French, English, and there might be two films, and pick the one you want to see. And it's related to the themes around you. Okay, so I asked about it, and where am I going here? There. And I thought, how far back in time do you want to go? Wild colonial boy, the early gold rush, 1862. No, no, no. We want a young, hip, vibrant exhibit for a modern audience. And there was not many audiences from 1862, but anyway. But labor history and musicians do have a history in British Columbia. And so I just focused very briefly in a paragraph and referenced the long Vancouver Island coal strike, which went until the start from 1910 to the start of World War I, and also included the death of Ginger Goodwin and things like that. So what you're looking at are images from the archives of the coal miners, and there they are on their protest parade, led by their band. And there are also songs which were written, because many of them were blacklisted. It became very violent. The militia were used, dynamite was thrown, anybody in a company house was evicted, and if they were evicted, they would never work in the industry again. So I focused on a song which was recovered in the 1950s and sung. So there's a case where there's a cell phone link, and it takes you to the history of folk music in BC, where there's songs for all sorts of different industries and occupations that you can go to. And I thought also it was important for me to find BC stories that would connect with the established themes. The Indigenous work was done because when I was asked, I naively said snotty-nosed res kids. And, oh, they're already in. Oh, good, okay. So for Black history, Paul Robeson's concert at the Peace Arch is really quite interesting. It's an important BC music event, and it didn't take place in BC. It took place on the American side of the Peace Arch, with 30,000 British Columbians on the other side of the border listening to him. We were... It was in the middle of a Cold War battle over trade unions established in the 30s by socialists and communists, and the trade unions that are supported by the US government and the Canadian government, and the United Miners Smeltermen and blank. Union were having their convention in Vancouver, and they asked Paul Robeson to come and speak. There was one wrinkle. The U.S. government was following him. He was on a blacklist because he actually was the son of a slave. And he was an A student in university in the United States. He was on the football team. He was one of their stars. He was in musicals. He had a hit with the musical Showboat. He was also in the film. He was asked by the Royal Shakespearean Company to come and play Othello in London. And he was one of the best-selling baritones in the world. There's a record, a Canadian record from 1926 up in the exhibit of Motherless Child, which is a song not written by him, but about children who were taken from their families under slavery. And I was really pleased to find a Canadian 78. So it goes back. And that was his massive career through the 20s. But by the 30s, with the Great Depression, he began to really think about his lot in life. And so I like this button from the Syracuse Cultural Works Tools for Justice and Liberation Co-op, who still exist even under the current president. Because I contacted them to ask them what year was this made, and they gave me the date for it. But it's the quote, an artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I have made my choice. I have no alternative. And so by the 1940s, he was blacklisted, couldn't enter Canada, if he left the United States, he wouldn't be allowed back in as an American citizen. It took 5 years of court cases until he was issued a passport. And so the trade union invited him found out he couldn't get in, and backed a flatbed truck up to the border and had a pop-up concert, which they promoted and encouraged everybody to attend, and 30,000 people attended. And he sang spirituals, gospel songs, union songs, and it was so successful he came back the next year, and he repeated that concert 3 times. Now, one of the things I found in the BC archives is they have an actual recording of the first concert, but it was signed, and there's no way you can put that record out so that people can read the signature for the length of time for an exhibit without causing the ink to fade. So what you'll see in there is a recording of his second concert. But the first concert, I think the only signed copy I'm aware of in the world, is in the BC archives. So there is a connection. I believe they got it from the trade union itself. There's a picture of him peeking around the boundary marker at the Peace Arch, and one of a number of shots that I found of the crowds on the Canadian side who came to listen to him. And I think more people should know about that event, particularly in the politics of our time, which makes this exhibit even more relevant than when we sort of, than a year ago, as events have changed. Another story of racism and Black history is one that I found by accident. A record store in Esquimalt was closing, and I picked out a whole bunch of records, and I found that record in the racks, and I picked it up and I looked at it, and on the back was a story to do with the photograph, which is by Joe McGuinness. And when I got to the cash register, they didn't take debit or Visa, and I had to put one record back, and I went, well, you're not really a jazz person. And so I put it back and I walked away. Years later, I found a copy online for sale in North Carolina, and I bought it and I had it shipped and put in the history collection, and then thought about it and thought, you know, this actually should be down in the archives because it'll be easier for researchers to find it. So what happened is Louis Armstrong in 1949 arrived with his orchestra. It wasn't his first visit to Vancouver. But it was a large group, and he traveled with, you know, a valet and a hairdresser and quite an entourage. His manager was Jewish, and the group arrived, and a fleet of taxis took them to the Hotel Vancouver. When they got to the Hotel Vancouver, there was a young man on the desk, and they asked for rooms for everybody. There was 30 or 40 people in the group, and a white manager, name unknown, strode across the lobby and said to the desk clerk, "What are those N-word people doing in the lobby? Get rid of them. We don't rent rooms to people like that." And the desk clerk turned red and was very apologetic and said they had a room for Mr. Armstrong, but not for the rest of his group. And he said, "Well, if you don't have a room for them, then you don't have a room for me." And he sat down in the lobby. Joe McGuinness from the Vancouver Sun was there as a photographer, and the young jazz fan who was there by 1967 released this record of Louis Armstrong playing later in the nightclubs of Vancouver with his band, and wrote the story up on the back. So, being a good historian, I wanted to verify it and, you know, go and check the legislative library, card indexes, and things like that. There was no record anywhere of what had happened, except on the record. The hotel was a major sponsor in Vancouver, did a lot of advertising, or it wasn't news at that time. So I really wanted to tell that story. And another reason that's personal is I was down in Louisiana, and in one of the state museums, and was surprised to look over and see a trumpet that belonged to Louis Armstrong when he was in the band as an orphan. And he learned trumpet in an orphanage. And then I found this photo of him taking time out of his day to attend a teen radio show and answer questions from the kids. And I thought, yeah, it speaks a lot about the character of that man. The desk clerk helped them find a hotel down the road, which not only welcomed them all, but put flowers in the rooms of every member of the band, and became where black artists stayed when they came to play Vancouver, because the word of mouth spread pretty quickly. And the reason I wanted to tell the story is not just social justice or to slam the Hotel Vancouver for the times they lived in and attitudes. It's really to say, well, that's what it was like in BC, and most people know and like Louis Armstrong, and so that's how he was treated. So you can imagine how, if you were just anybody driving through, how you'd be treated. And I also knew, I believed the story right from the start. My mother had worked serving peas in the dining room in the lodge in Jasper as one of her first summer jobs. And she was there when two older ladies from the American South called for the manager and asked to have a middle-class black husband and wife removed from the dining room because it was inappropriate to dine with them. And that's the Jasper Lodge. So if you're talking about 1949 and 50, that was the state of racial lines in the grand hotels in Canada. So that's a story I got from my mother. They were used to this sort of thing, and they were very polite, she said, and said no problem, and the maitre d' set them up on a side room with their own table and moved their meal. Yeah. Same hotel, had Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe and Jimmy Stewart stay there, things like that. Yeah, okay. And then I knew from Bob Griffin had done an exhibit on Black history many years ago, and he had used a clip from a TV show of a variety show in Vancouver quite early. And I started digging, going, who was that, etc. And I discovered the story of Eleanor Collins. And thanks to the Screen Actors Guild, they actually put me in touch with her daughter, Judith Maxey, who controls the estate. And Eleanor Collins' family were, I believe, from Omaha. In the 1930s, when the Ku Klux Klans were having grand parades through Washington, D.C., some of the American states began tightening up anti-black laws and rules. So there was an out-migration into Canada. And Canada responded by making it harder to come into Canada if you were black in a response to that. The family left, settled in Edmonton, where she was born, and they learned their musical craft, singing in churches. And her sister moved to Vancouver to join a theater company and said, come on down. So she did. And she met her husband, who was a railway porter based in Vancouver. And they had 4 children. And her style of resistance to racism was really quite unique. The black neighborhood that was bulldozed for the freeway in Vancouver was also the hotels where railway porters stayed, but most of them had families in Montreal or Halifax or Toronto, and they were just needed a room because the next day they were going out again. And there were clubs and restaurants and after-hours speakeasies and things like that. She actually told her kids as they grew up they weren't to go into that end of town, that they would be trouble. And when they bought their house in Burnaby, the neighbors started a petition because a black family was moving into the suburban neighborhood. And her response was, we'll be better than them. And so she immediately went out and joined the Red Cross, the PTA. She sang in churches, joined all the choirs. She sang for hospital benefits, for prison benefits, and she became very active. And she said, no, we're not going to talk back. We're going to stand tall and be ourselves. And so don't go to the other end of town and all of that sort of thing. So she began singing in clubs, and by 1948, 49, she was seen as one of the best vocalists in Vancouver. And by 1955, she was the first black woman to have a variety show of her own in North America. In 1955, in a summer show on the CBC. A lot of people don't know much about her because her show is her work is only captured in the CBC archives, and their social justice policy is you can't show it without the permission of the estates of every musician who's in the broadcast, plus the publishing rights for whoever wrote the song, and of course the rights of her estate. So you could view a copy, but you could not use it in the exhibit. So the hunt was on to find who had the estate. And Judith was great because she was the one who filled me in on all those details and said, my mother did not fight racism the way a lot of people think black individuals fought it in Canada. She did it this way. And so I came in with stereotypes and she corrected me. And she faced racism all over the place, but she was better than them. And that was her style. So she ended up in Chatelaine magazine as a role model for black women all across Canada. And if you read some of the old interviews, they're very patronizing. And she doesn't rise to the bait or snap back at them. She just, well, you know, that's like Louis Armstrong. That's what I have to deal with every day. A theater group she was with was going to cast a white woman in a singing role in blackface. And she just said, no. And not only me, my kids too. Like all four of us are going to walk, or three at that time. So she started making changes at the community level in what was acceptable and what was not. And she continued to sing at the P&E, you know, for decades and all of that. One of the last concerts she gave for Black History, and they, you know, sing whatever you want. Oh, okay. So she came out and they said, what are you going to sing? And she said, I'm going to sing It's Not Easy Being Green by Kermit the Frog, which is a song deliberately about race that said you have to learn to become comfortable with who you are, which is what happens as the song progresses. So I really like the story of Eleanor Collins. She has her own stamp. She received the Order of Canada before she died, and she died at 104. So, you know, it's both an Albertan story, because that's where she was born, but really it's a BC story. And she's quite amazing, and not enough people know about her. Now, for musicians and being green and protecting the environment, Steve Lewis, when this project started, he handed me the guidebook from the Winnipeg show, and which he'd seen, and he said, here, you know, but give it back, which I did eventually. But he said, you've got to do Claquot, because Midnight Oil came out and played there, and he's a big fan of the Tragically Hip, and he saw the concert of the two bands in Edmonton many years ago. And so, okay, Steve, I can do that. That fits the theme nicely. So I started digging in, and I met Lawrence McLaughlin. I always put an H in there, and it's not, and an L, and after the G, but anyway. McLaughlin. He took photographs and did many of the covers of Monday Magazine. And when the protest was going on, he asked his editor, you know, send me up there, I'll write a story on it. And the editor said, no, you're not going up there. He went up anyways. So he was there. He's a great photographer. He did a lot of social commentary photos around the world and on the East Coast. But that's Peter Garrett, the lead singer of Midnight Oil, standing on a stump, talking to the protesters at the blockade about how important what they're doing is. And that led to passive resistance and the mass arrests, and that's another one of Lawrence's photographs. It was a lovely series, but those are two of the strongest. No trees, no fish, no jobs was a common placard theme. 740 people were arrested, but you hear sometimes 1,100, but some people were arrested more than once. So that's why you hear two numbers. It depends on how you count. He gave me the original prints, and I brought them in, and just across the hall, Shane scanned them, and then I said, call me as soon as they're done, because I got to get them back to him, and all of that. The other thing that happened is I met Eric Tolman, and how, I was looking on YouTube, and I started finding films, and then I tried Facebook and started sending out messages to see if I could find this Eric Tolman. He's a Victoria history teacher in a high school, and he went up there with his high-8 camera, stood on a stump, and filmed Midnight Oil for an hour when they performed at 9 o'clock in the morning with acoustic instruments on a couple of sheets of plywood on stumps with a tarp behind. It's a great film, and you can see the whole hour long on YouTube. It's simply Midnight Oil at Clackwat. You'll find it. Or there's clips in the exhibit as well. And he gave a copy of that film to the band, and the next year Peter Garrett joined the board of Greenpeace. And it wasn't the first environmental protest that they were a part of. Midnight Oil is a really interesting band because they decided as a group that they would, like the Icelandic band Sigur Rós and a Canadian band I know, they decided to tour their country and go to the poorest, smallest towns and only play there, which were mostly Aboriginal communities. And they came back politically charged on issues of race and indigenous rights and landscape and environmental protection. So I thought that fit really nicely. There's some posters from Vancouver. There were writers were doing readings on the steps of the legislature, and in Vancouver, punk bands were performing benefits and so forth. It was really a major event, and it was the start of the mass protests. And prior to that, there'd been indigenous protests about what was going on, but the sort of magic combination led to the creation of the biosphere and indigenous governments over forests in their traditional lands. So it's an important event in BC history. I was also interested in people who became successful singing in their own language. And that led me to Mo Dalawal, I'd worked with many years ago on the City of Bangra festivals, which sprung up in Surrey and then spread throughout Vancouver. It's changed now. It's called the 5X Festival. It's a new generation running them, and they're also concerned with trans and gay rights in terms of the performers they present. Here's a community that becomes one of the top 3 cities in the world for music that was never played on any radio station except a Punjabi one. That wasn't on the CBC. And if you went into HMV, there were no records or CDs for sale to this day. I was in Surrey and I went into the HMV in that huge mall, and a young South Asian girl was at the till, and I asked about where could I find music by the following artists, and they said, "Oh, we don't carry ethnic music." And what I also found interesting about the music is that it transcends the old media that musicians used. They don't put out records. They no longer put out CDs. It's all on the internet. And then when you go looking with the right artists' names, you'll find out they have 1 billion hits for views. And they have a huge catalog, and that one has 400 million hits, and this one has 600 million hits. So they're singing often about social justice in their own language, and ignored by mainstream society. And they don't care, and they're extremely successful. So I thought it was a really interesting story to tell as an outreach to people who aren't aware of it. There's Raymond Buller, one of the most famous drum teachers in Surrey, where you can take dance or Punjabi drumming for credit in high school and in community college. And it became this celebration of things that began as harvest songs and now have songs like Brown Monday, which reaches out and connected globally. And it says, basically, because of the color of my skin and the menial jobs I have, working in the kitchen in the restaurant, renting you a rental car, working as a mechanic, driving a truck across the border or something, I'm either just another brown skin or I'm invisible. And when that song came out with a group of artists like A.P. Dillon and well, there are about 6 artists involved in that song, it suddenly just took off globally. It was like #1 in the Punjabi communities in Manchester and Birmingham, and doing well in India, and it touched a nerve all across. And it's fascinating music. I also did a panel on Moose Walla, and most people don't know about him. They know who Tupac is, and they know who Biggie Small is in hip hop. But when I was in Surrey looking in a religious shop across from a temple, there were T-shirts, and there were all these T-shirts to Moose Walla, and one that said "Straight out of Punjab," which I loved because "Straight out of Compton" is a famous slogan in hip hop. And as I worked more on it, I realized that there are all these connections: racism, gangs, the drug trade, the actions of the police, and the love of dance and drum beats. So there's a strong connection between Surrey and East LA, musically speaking, because they have gone through similar things, and they each make their own kind of music. So it was really interesting when the music was showing up at Coachella and places like that, and connecting and blurring. So there are people like Delhi to Dublin who mix Celtic music with Bhangra. So it's kind of neat. I was hoping to do even more. I was reaching out to some other artists who sing in their languages, but we ran out of time and it just didn't work. Now, I thought, well, what do I know about the experience of gay artists in the BC music industry? There've always been gay artists in the BC music industry, but they may not speak about it. And I thought, well, I don't know what I could do with that. And then I remembered Farron, who's an instrumental of hers was in Century Hall's soundtrack when that opened in 2000, I think it was. And I used to listen to her records, which I think are quite brilliant. Testimony and Shadows on a Dime are fabulous records recorded in BC. She left an abusive home when she was 15. She claims Francophone and Métis heritage, and she's also a lesbian. And she found herself sort of sitting on the pavement crying at the age of 15 with a guitar and nowhere to go, and looked over, and to this day she doesn't know if somebody saw her and just dropped a roll of money or whether it just appeared. But there was a roll of money, and it will be okay. And she made her own way in her own community. In many ways, as a talented poet, and she is a talented poet, her songs are not protest songs per se, like "Where Are My Rights" and this sort of thing. She just sort of traced out her life as the person she was. She never announced that she was out of the closet or anything. She just was Farron. And she got involved with all sorts of other women founding bands. She was playing in the first Vancouver Folk Festival, the women's radio shows on the Vancouver Co-op radio. There's some footage of her playing there in 1975. And she became really the soundtrack for women in Vancouver from 1975 all the way through. And she did it without being, by example. I think that's the best way to put it. Radical Harmonies talks about the explosion of women artists, women-only music festivals that were happening in the women's movement through the late 70s into the 1980s. And she influenced a lot of people. Her song Testimony has become very much an anthem. And I found a lot of material online, the City of Vancouver Gay and Lesbian Archives, who didn't charge the museum a penny for the use of their material. And I don't know if you can read that. That's a little bit of her lyrics, but we didn't want to be too word heavy. And that's a photo of what she looks like today. She has heart murmurs, she has arthritis, maybe a little gout, whether she'll be able to play a guitar or just sing. And this is, 50 years on of being an example. And if you're interested in her, she will be playing on July 5th at the Victoria Folk Festival. So there'll be a chance to see her. One of the things about her that I learned along the way is she's very what's the right phrase? Fans will come up to her and say, "I've loved your music. It helped me through some really hard times in my life. Can I give you a hug?" And the answer is no. Like she needs this protective personal space, and she just is, and she shares herself with very few people as a person. She doesn't like technology. I've had one email from her, and that took several weeks to get it back, and all of that. But if there's anybody who I think is deserving of a Order of BC, and if anybody is feeling like writing a letter of nomination, she is very deserving. So, and of course, Michael knew that I knew people in the punk community from back there. And there was some great material from the Human Rights Museum. Joey Shithead's vest, Joey Keithley, and I had a wonderful time looking. A friend of mine had the print on the right, and he pointed, and he said, I think he said, "That's me," or was it "That's me?" But he knew which one he was. And that's a scene here in Victoria. And the poster on the side was from the first free concert. They kind of tried to stop it. It was in Stanley Park, and they didn't have a permit. And so the punks went over and talked to a Christian picnic group who were pleased to loan them their permit. So the concert went forward. That comes from a memoir from Joey Keithley. Yeah. And the Museum of Vancouver had some really interesting material and ideas to give us and to loan us. So you'll see their material in there. The posters come from a number of places, but I can't sing the praises high enough for the staff of the Simon Fraser University Special Collections. They have a Vancouver punk collection. They have a Jerry the Poster Guy collection. Jerry kept one each of 1,100 posters for events in Vancouver in perfect condition. They've had a big discussion about copyright and ethics. Who owns the poster? There are a number of interpretations that are possible. The artist who drew it, the print shop who printed it, because they fixed it on paper, the promoter of the concert, whoever that was. Sometimes it was a committee thrown together for, you know, a social justice reason, names unknown. So they got a grant and digitized all 1,100 posters, put them up. Gordon McCaw donated his early Vancouver punk photos. DOA's manager donated 700 pieces from DOA, posters and so forth. And they simply put up a notice saying, if you believe that you are the copyright owner of this material, please contact us because we'd like to make it right. And then they use it in the classrooms at the university for their social culture courses, which is a really innovative approach. And since they've done it, nobody has come forward and sued them. It's really quite interesting. But I did have to contact Gordon McCaw to see if he was okay with me using his punk photos for this exhibit. He said, sure. And that was it. You know, the email is our permission. And I got 6 images from them, maybe. Not all of them got used. And then they said, no, there's no fee. So I learned in the project that, you know, I could go to one place and be charged $50 for an image. Someplace else it would be free. The policy within 50 kilometers of here is all over the place. But I like Simon Fraser's approach to the material. Here's one of Gordon's photos. I should have put that credit in there. That's DOA playing. There's Randy Rampage on bass, Chuck Biscuits in the back on drums, and Joey Shithead, or Joey Keithley on guitar. The poster down below, which does not come to conservation standards, is one that I removed from a street post when I went to that concert. And afterwards, I was at the front of the stage for the Dead Kennedys, and I didn't know it was them, and I said, this warm-up band is great. I thought it was going to be Toxic Reasons, right? And then 2 people grabbed me and threw me through the air, through the crowd, and I found myself on the Commodore dance floor, which is a sprung dance floor. And I'm bouncing, and I just look all around, and it's nothing but construction boots, and I'm going, and a little voice in the back of my head said, these are not your friends, get out of this crowd now. And then I moved back to where it was a little safer. And the DOA, there's a story about how they went down and there was a riot when they played with Black Flag. It's a well-known event. The poster is done by Craig Pettibone, who's the brother of the lead singer and the founder of Black Flag and their record label. The person in the picture is Charlie Manson. And she's saying, you better be nice, Charlie, it's really hard to get in here. And underneath it, it says, Creepy Crawl Lewinsky, which I didn't know was something that Charlie Manson and his group did before the bloodshed that came later. And that was break into stars' homes and move all the furniture around and then leave without taking anything. It was a creepy crawl. And he used that as a training exercise. So it's a pretty intense poster. And when DOA first played with Black Flag, they only got paid $10 in beer, and they'd driven all the way from Vancouver, 3,000 kilometers. So they weren't going to play this concert at first, but they agreed that they would pay them $175. So they got in a Volkswagen Rabbit and drove down. And to make more money, they decided to do 2 shows. So there are 500 people inside trying to get out, 500 people outside trying to get in, and then somebody started throwing beer cans at the police who were waiting for something to happen. And that became a very famous riot. They never got paid. They drove back to Vancouver, but they became famous all across North America as one of the bands that caused the riot on Sunset Strip. And that's the map from their archives of their first trip. And you can see that it was Vancouver, play your way down the coast, and a little bit later then you can go to Austin and work your way over here. and maybe you might go to Minneapolis and over to New York, and of course playing all the way across Canada to Halifax and all of that. And as they came down, they formed alliances in San Francisco with the Dead Kennedys and their record label. And Victoria's No Means No toured with them and also met the Dead Kennedys and were also signed to their label, Alternative Tentacles. And they also signed the Dayglow Abortions, a very family-friendly name, who were sued into Canada's Supreme Court over a cover art. And everybody thinks it was an album called Fetus, Fetus that involved a pie and Ronald Reagan. But that's what they did after they won the court case. The one before had a pistol and a mouse and a slice of cake, and I don't see what the whole thing was about. But they were the first artists in Canada to be sued over their cover art, and they won the case. The Supreme Court found in their favor, also from Victoria. And also from Victoria, Dee Dee and the Dish Rags. No, there was no one called Dee Dee. And they were founded here in Victoria, did really quite well. When they played at the university with DOA and opened, that's when the Wright brothers saw punk for the first time and immediately said, we have to start a band. And it influenced everybody. So I found Robert took the pictures of them when they opened for the Ramones. And they opened for the Clash, who danced on the side of the stage while they were playing. And they were the first women's punk band in at least Western North America, possibly in all of North America. And Don Denton, who's a resident here and has spent his whole life photographing music concerts in Victoria, took the other photo. And he's still doing that. So there's one of No Means No more famous albums, and one of their very early 45s, the second one. That's from a friend, a local collector, and the record, I bought that at Supreme Echo from Jason Flower. That's a reissue on Alternative Tentacles. Yeah. And so they influenced all sorts of bands like the Neos, borrowed a bass from that, you'll see in the exhibit, and other bands like Automatic Shock, and that weirdo up there is me trying to get ready to make spiderweb sounds in the Fernwood Community Center because we were doing a cover of Spider-Man, because our bass player would only get up at noon and would eat Fruit Loops and play along with the Spider-Man cartoon show before he'd come with us for rehearsal. So we had to play Spider-Man to make him happy. And then the bigger story is the Subhumans, also from Vancouver, Denzians of the Smiling Buddha Cafe, and there's Jerry Hanna playing bass. The year before, when they came to the OAP, and it's interesting that all the old punks are now old age pensioners, and punk started in the old age pensioner hall in Victoria. That year, they were already putting out posters against cruise missiles. And Jerry would join an underground group, it's all described in the panel on the Squamish 5, that resulted in a car bomb in Toronto that injured 10 people, and a long and complicated court case which had the Dead Kennedys come to the OAP to raise money for their legal defense. And an older punk, although you wouldn't know that to see him on the street, told me that he and a group of other punks staged a sit-in protest and protested the fact that punks were paying money to support a cause of people who were willing to commit violence to other people. So they staged a sit-in, and it actually split the punk community, but most of them went in because they wanted to see the Dead Kennedys. And Jerry Hannon, Jerry, during the trial, wrote this letter from prison as they were going through. They were all found guilty. They received sentences of up to 10 years. All of them were released within 5 years. And so there's some material on that in the case. And this was that Thursday night opening. Jason Lamb, who wrote the book on No Means No and runs the punk show on the Q, asked me to take his picture with Joey, who's a counselor in Burnaby on social justice issues. The band had played over 300 concerts for social issues as part of their ethic. And my wife said, you have to blur the face of the man up there because we don't know who he is and we don't have his permission, so. Yeah, so thank you really to the RBCM staff, and I've already mentioned Kelsey Miner of design, and it was great because you could just hand everything over to people that you'd work with and just trust them to do a fabulous job, which was a fabulous outcome. I mentioned that. And to Julia, the curator who came out here from the Human Rights Museum, and to Jodi, who was on the original team and was part of the decision to bring me on. All of the archives and all of their staffs, particularly Wendy Nichols at the Museum of Vancouver, who gave some good advice. All the photographers, people who advised me and gave me all sorts of input. But the last thing I'd like to say is filmmakers. Every filmmaker who appears in the little screens where you can select clips, usually about 1 or 2 minutes, all of them gave permission for us to use their films for nothing. And they signed waivers for that. Don't miss it. You know, their stuff is really quite fabulous. And hopefully we might be able to do an event with showing the full films at some other time. You know, in workshops or something as the exhibit goes on. And that's it. So.